The firelight flickered across the meadow, casting long shadows that danced with the whispers of the pine trees surrounding my property. I'd set up my old canvas tent in the same spot I always did, right where the ridge sloped down to meet the creek that cut through my 20 acres. Like a silver thread, this was my sanctuary, a patch of Montana wilderness I'd bought 12 years ago with every cent I'd saved from my years. As a mechanic, the cooler beside me held a couple of cold beers, a half-eaten roast beef sandwich, and a bag of jerky I'd made myself from last season's deer. The night was perfect, the kind of quiet that felt alive, filled with the hum of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. I leaned back in my folding chair, the one with the frayed armrests that my wife, Clara, used to tease me about, saying it was older than our marriage. Clara, even after 7 years without her, I could still feel her presence here, in the way the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, in the way the stars seemed to wink at me like she used to when we'd lie out here, planning our future. We dreamed of building a cabin by the creek, maybe a small barn for horses, a place where our kids' we never got to have could grow up free. This land was our promise to each other, sealed with the last of her strength before the leukemia took her. I'd kept it pristine, untouched by the developers who'd been sniffing around western Montana for years, turning family ranches into gated communities for rich out-of-staters. The crack of a branch snapped me out of my reverie. I sat up, scanning the darkness beyond the fire's glow. Probably just a deer, I told myself, but my hand instinctively went to the hunting knife strapped to my belt. Living out here, you learn to trust your gut, and mine was telling me something wasn't right. Then I saw the lights red and blue, slicing through the night like a warning. Two sheriff's department SUVs rolled up the dirt path to my campsite, their tires crunching gravel loud enough to drown out the creek. I stood, my heart kicking up a notch, as Deputy Matt Coleman stepped out of the lead vehicle. Matt and I went way back, shared beers at the VFW after he got back from Iraq and I'd lost Clara. He was a good guy, but the look on his face tonight was all business. Behind him came the real problem, Helen Warrick, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. She strode toward me in a crisp blazer and boots that looked like they'd never seen mud before tonight. Her hair was pulled back tight, her face set in a smug expression that made my skin crawl. She pointed at me like I was a stray dog caught in her yard. "That's him, deputy," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This man is trespassing on Silver Pines property, disturbing our residents with his unauthorized encampment." Matt scratched his neck, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Jake, I'm sorry, man, but we got a complaint. Ms. Warrick says this creek and the land around it belong to the HOA. Something about watershed rights." I felt my blood start to boil, but I kept my voice steady. "Matt, you know me. I've owned this land for 12 years, paid for it with my own money, every acre mapped and deeded. This creek's mine, and so's the ridge. I've got the papers to prove it." Helen's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Papers can be forged, Mr. Thornton. Everyone knows this creek feeds into our community's water system. Your little camping stunt is endangering our residents' safety." Matt shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his duty belt. "Look, Jake, I gotta follow protocol. Ms. Warrick's been talking about some HOA initiative as community safety, funding for the department. I don't like this any more than you do, but I need you to pack up and head home for now. We'll sort it out at the station." The unfairness of it hit me like a punch to the gut. This was my land, bought with my sweat and Clara's dreams, and now I was being run off by some power-hungry woman who probably couldn't tell a trout stream from a drainage ditch. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the deed, creased from years of carrying it like a talisman. "Matt, look at this. County stamped, notarized. This is my property, and I'm not going anywhere." Helen snatched the deed before Matt could take it, her manicured nails flashing in the firelight. She made a show of scanning it, then tossed it back at me like it was trash. "This proves nothing. The HOA has legal precedence over watershed rights. You're out of your depth, Mr. Thornton." I caught the deed, my jaw clenching so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Clara's voice echoed in my head. "This land's our home, Jake. Don't let anyone take it." I started packing my gear, each movement sharp with anger. "You're making a mistake, Helen," I said, my voice low. "My papers don't lie, even if you do." She just smirked, standing there like she'd already won. "This land will be ours, Mr. Thornton. And soon, everyone will know it." Matt walked me to my truck, his hand on my shoulder in what might have been an apology or just making sure I left. "We'll figure this out, Jake. Just give me time to check the records." But as I drove away, Helen's silhouette in my rearview mirror felt like a bad omen. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, and I glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number. "Leave the creek or you'll lose more than land." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. Someone was watching me, threatening me, and I had a sinking feeling Helen Warrick's ambitions went deeper than anyone in Silver Pines realized. Back at my cabin, a mile from the creek, I spread every document I had across the kitchen tablet deed. Tax records, survey maps. The cabin was small, just a one-bedroom I'd built myself, with Clara's old quilt draped over the couch and her favorite mug still on the counter, like she might walk in any minute. I pored over the papers, looking for anything I might have missed. That's when I noticed it, an old survey map from the county, one I'd gotten when I bought the place. There, along the creek's boundary, someone had scribbled "disputed" in faint pencil. My stomach twisted. Was this the leverage Helen thought she had? I needed answers, and I knew who might have them. Agnes Miller, the town's unofficial historian, had lived in these hills since before Silver Pines was a twinkle in some developer's eye. She'd seen ranches sold, families pushed out, and HOA letters rise like weeds. I called her, and despite the late hour, she answered on the first ring. "Jake Thornton, I figured you'd call sooner or later," she said, her voice dry as sagebrush. "Let me guess, Helen Warrick's after your creek." I told her about the police, the threat, the disputed mark. She chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That woman's been pulling stunts like this for years. Come by tomorrow with your papers. There's something you need to know about our dear HOA president." Her words gave me a flicker of hope, but it didn't last. My laptop pinged with a new email, and Helen's name in the sender line made my pulse spike. The message was dressed up in legal jargon, but the threat was clear: cease and desist from accessing HOA-controlled property, or face legal action. Attached were photos of me at the creek, taken from angles I hadn't noticed. Timestamps going back months. Someone had been watching me, documenting my every move on my own land. The next morning, a knock on my door jolted me awake. Through the peephole, I saw Carl Dempsey, one of Helen's HOA cronies, standing there in a cheap suit, his salesman's smile as fake as his tan. Carl ran a hardware store in town, but everyone knew he was Helen's errand boy. "Mr. Thornton," he started. Before I'd even opened the door fully, the HOA's got a generous offer. "Sign over the creek rights, and we'll make this go away. No lawsuits, no trouble. Helen's even willing to pay a little for your trouble." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "And if I don't?" His smile tightened, his eyes flicking to his car like he wanted to run away to my cabin. The air heavy with the scent of pine and the faint chemical tang of the creek. The stars were still out, faint against the dawn, and I thought of Clara. How she'd loved this place, how she'd made me promise to fight for it. I wasn't just fighting for land, I was fighting for her, for us. And I wasn't about to let Helen Warrick, or anyone else, take that away. The morning after Carl's visit, I drove to Agnes Miller's place, my truck rattling over the gravel roads that wound through the foothills. The folder of documents on the passenger seat felt heavier than it should, each paper a piece of my life with Clara, now under siege by Helen Warrick's greed. Agnes lived in a weathered cabin perched on a ridge overlooking the valley, her property a patchwork of wildflowers and rusted farm equipment she'd collected over decades. She was waiting on her porch when I pulled up, a mug of coffee in one hand and a stack of old files in the other. Her eyes, sharp despite her 70 years, scanned me like she could see the weight I was carrying. "Jake Thornton, you look like you haven't slept since Clinton was president," she said, motioning me inside. "Come on, I've got something you need to see." Her living room was a time capsule, walls covered with faded photos of Montana's ranching days, yellowed newspaper clippings, and maps pinned with notes in her spidery handwriting. She set the files on a table cluttered with mason jars and dog-eared books. then handed me a photograph that made my breath catch. It showed a younger Helen Warrick, maybe 10 years ago, standing by a creek not unlike mine, shaking hands with a man in a suit. Behind them, a sign read Silver Pines Development Groundbreaking. The man's face was familiar. Richard Holt, a real estate lawyer who'd left town under a cloud of rumors a few years back. This was taken in Idaho, Agnes said, tapping the photo. Helen was part of a development firm that tried to strong-arm ranchers into selling their water rights. Sound familiar? They pushed too hard, got sued, and lost big. She and Richard slunk out of state, but not before bankrupting a couple of families. She's been playing the same game here, just with an HOA badge instead of a corporate one. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. So she's done this before. Why isn't she in jail? Agnes snorted. Money and connections. Richard's got friends in high places, and Helen's got a knack for staying just this side of legal. But that creek of yours, it's the key to her latest scheme. Silver Pines wants to expand, build a golf course, maybe a resort. Your land's in the way. She pulled out a faded document, a county filing from 15 years ago. It was a water rights dispute, not unlike the one Helen was claiming now, where a developer had tried to seize a stream by arguing it was part of a community watershed. They'd lost, but the tactic was eerily similar. Helen's recycling old tricks, Agnes said. But she's gotten smarter. She's got the sheriff's department in her pocket, or at least she thinks she does. I thought of Matt Coleman, his uncomfortable shuffle at my campsite, his talk of department funding. My fists clenched. Matt's not dirty. He's just caught in the middle. Maybe, Agnes said, her eyes narrowing. But Helen's got a way of making good people do bad things. You need to be careful, Jake. And you need more than papers to beat her. She handed me a USB drive. This has everything I've got: court records, news articles, even some emails I acquired from a friend at the county office. Use it, but don't ask how I got it. I drove home with the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket, my mind churning with questions. Who else was in on Helen's scheme? How far would she go to take my land? The threat from the unknown number still lingered in my mind. Leave the creek, or you'll lose more than land. I wasn't just fighting for property anymore. This was personal. A war against someone who thought she could erase Clara's memory from this place. Back at the cabin, I plugged the USB into my laptop and started digging. The files were a goldmine. There were emails between Helen and Richard Holt, discussing acquisition strategies for properties around Silver Pines. One email, dated 6 months ago, mentioned my creek specifically. Thornton's land is the linchpin. Secure the water rights, and the resort deal is ours. Another file showed a pattern of HOA complaints against other landowners' fines for minor infractions. Easements suddenly appearing on deeds. Property lines adjusted in county records. It was systematic, ruthless, and all led back to Helen. But the real bombshell was a grainy photo, timestamped 2 years ago, showing Helen and Carl Dempsey at my creek in the middle of the night. They were carrying what looked like surveying equipment, and Carl was holding a canister marked with a hazard symbol. My stomach dropped. Were they already tampering with my water? I thought of the faint chemical smell I'd noticed near the creek lately, dismissed as runoff from a neighbor's farm. Now I wasn't so sure. I needed to act fast. Helen's cease and desist email had promised legal action, and I knew she wouldn't stop at threats. I called Matt, hoping to catch him before Helen could tighten her grip. He answered on the third ring, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Jake, I'm swamped." "What's up?" "I've got proof Helen's been lying," I said, keeping my tone calm despite the anger simmering inside. "She's done this before, Matt. In Idaho. Pushed people off their land with fake claims. I've got documents, photos, emails. You need to see this." There was a long pause. "Send it over," he finally said. "But Jake, be careful. Helen's got half the town council eating out of her hand. She's been talking about a big development deal, something about bringing jobs to the county. People listen to her." I emailed him the files, then headed to the creek to check for any signs of tampering. The water looked clear in the daylight, but that chemical tang was still there, stronger now. I took samples in old mason jars, labeling them with the date and location. If Helen was poisoning my creek, I'd need hard evidence. As I worked, I set up a few trail cameras I'd bought on sale cheap, but they'd record in the dark. I hid them in the pines, angling them to cover the creek's main access points. If Helen or her goons came back, I'd catch them. That night, I barely slept, my laptop open to the camera feeds. Around 2 a.m., the screen lit up with movement. A figure in dark clothing slipped through the trees, carrying a heavy bag. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the creek. My heart pounded as I zoomed in, catching the glint of an HOA badge on their jacket. It was Carl Dempsey, his face clear in the infrared light. He knelt by the water, uncapping a container and pouring a dark liquid into the stream. The water shimmered unnaturally, an oily sheen spreading across the surface. I saved the footage, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just about land anymore. Helen was willing to destroy my creek, Clara's creek, to get what she wanted. I sent the video to Matt with a single line, "She's poisoning my water. Do your job." His response came at dawn, "Meet me at the station. Bring everything." I packed the USB drive, the water samples, and my deed, then drove into town, my mind racing with what came next. Helen thought she could bully me into submission, but she'd underestimated me. Clara's voice echoed in my head, "This land's our home, Jake." I wasn't giving it up without a fight. At the sheriff's station, Matt looked like he hadn't slept in days. He took the USB and the samples, his jaw tightening as he watched the footage. "Jesus, Jake," he said, rubbing his eyes. "This is bad. Environmental crimes, destruction of property. Helen's gone too far." "She's been going too far for years," I said. "You just didn't want to see it." He flinched, and I felt a pang of guilt. Matt wasn't the enemy, just a guy caught in a web of promises and pressure. "I'm opening an investigation," he said. "But Helen's got pull. The council's backing her resort plan, and they're not gonna like this. I need you to lay low while I dig into it." "Lay low," I snapped. "She's poisoning my creek, Matt. Threatening me. You think I'm gonna sit back and let her win?" He held up a hand. "I'm not saying that. Just give me a couple days to get the EPA involved. If this is toxic, we've got her dead to rights." I nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere. Helen's victory party was scheduled for tomorrow night at the Silver Pines Clubhouse, a celebration of her community leadership. I'd seen the invites on social media, all glossy photos and promises of a brighter future for Silver Pines. If she was this confident, she was planning something big. I needed to be there, to see what she was telling her followers, to find the cracks in her armor. The clubhouse was a monument to excess, all glass and polished wood, built with HOA dues that could have fixed the county's roads twice over. I slipped in through a side door, wearing a borrowed blazer to blend in with the crowd of retirees and tech millionaires who'd bought into Silver Pine's promise of luxury. The air smelled of expensive wine and perfume, and Helen stood at a podium, her smile as polished as the marble floors. "Friends," she began, her voice dripping with sincerity, "we're here to celebrate our community's strength, but we face a threat, a man who cares nothing for our safety, who's endangering our water supply with his reckless behavior." The crowd murmured, heads turning to look for the villain she described. I stayed in the back, my cap pulled low, but a woman nearby whispered to her friend, "I saw HOA trucks by that creek last week. What were they doing there at midnight?" I seized the moment, stepping forward with Agnes's documents in hand. "Maybe you'd like to know the truth," I said, loud enough to draw eyes. I held up the Idaho court filing, the official seal glinting under the chandelier light. 15 years ago, Helen Warrick tried to steal land in Idaho, lost a lawsuit, bankrupted families. Now she's doing the same here, claiming my creek as hers. The room went silent, then erupted in whispers. Helen's face flushed, but she recovered quickly, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "This man is lying," she said, her voice trembling for effect. "He's trying to tear our community apart." But the seed of doubt was planted. A man in the front row, probably a lawyer by his suit, stood up. "I'd like to see those documents," he said, his tone skeptical but curious. I handed them over, watching Helen's composure crack as he read aloud the details of her Idaho failure. The meeting descended into chaos, residents arguing, some defending Helen, others demanding answers. I slipped out during the uproar, but not before dropping a folder where Helen could see it, photos of her and Carl at my creek. the hazard canister clear as day. Her eyes widened, and I leaned in close. "You wanted to play dirty, Helen? I play to win." Back at the creek, I checked my cameras, making sure they were still recording. The footage of Carl was damning, but I needed more. I spent the day reinforcing the decoy cameras, making them obvious, while the real ones stayed hidden in birdhouses and rock piles. If Helen made another move, I'd be ready. That night, my laptop pinged again. Another figure at the creek, this time with a shovel, digging near the water's edge. I zoomed in, my heart sinking as I recognized Richard Holt, Helen's old partner from the Idaho photo. He was burying something, more canisters, maybe, or evidence he wanted gone. I saved the footage, my resolve hardening. Helen wasn't just coming for my land, she was destroying it, piece by piece. And I was going to make her pay. The dawn broke over the creek with a quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. I stood by the water's edge, the air heavy with the chemical tang I'd come to associate with Helen Warrick's schemes. My trail cameras had caught Richard Holt burying something last night, and I'd spent the early hours digging it up 3 metal canisters, each marked with hazard symbols and a faint residue that smelled like industrial solvent. I sealed them in plastic bags, labeled them for the EPA, and added the footage to my growing collection of evidence. My laptop screen glowed with the weight of Helen's crimes: Carl Dempsey poisoning the creek, Richard Holt hiding evidence, and a paper trail linking them both to Helen's HOA empire. But I knew evidence alone wouldn't stop her. She was too entrenched, too cunning, and too desperate to go down without a fight. Clara's letter sat on my dashboard as I drove into town, her handwriting a lifeline in the chaos. "This land's our home, Jake. Fight for it." I'd read those words 1,000 times since she'd written them, knowing she was fading but still believing in our dream. The letter was soft from folding, stained with coffee and tears, but it gave me strength. Today, I'd take the fight to Helen's doorstep, and I wasn't going alone. Agnes Miller met me at the county courthouse, her arms full of files and her eyes gleaming with the kind of fire that comes from decades of watching bullies like Helen prey on good people. She'd called in a favor with Maria Lopez, a former Silver Pines resident who'd lost her orchard to an HOA easement 2 years ago. Maria's story was a mirror of minifines for minor violations, forged documents, and a sudden reassessment of her property lines that left her with nothing. She'd moved to a trailer park on the edge of town, but her anger hadn't faded. "Helen laughed when they tore up my trees," Maria said, her voice tight as she signed a witness statement, said it was for the community's benefit. "I want her to pay." We weren't the only ones. Agnes had rallied a small army ranchers, retirees, even a few Silver Pines defectors who'd grown tired of Helen's reign. They gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Save our land" and "No more HOA tyranny." The crowd was small but loud, their voices carrying through the crisp Montana morning. I felt Clara's presence in their defiance, in the way they stood up for what was right. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was theirs too. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. Helen sat with her lawyer, a slick Dallas import named Victor Grayson, whose tailored suit and smug grin screamed money. She wore her usual mask of confidence, but I saw the cracks her nails tapping nervously on the table, her eyes darting to the crowd. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Clara Evans, the irony of her name wasn't lost on me, called the room to order. I presented my evidence, the videos of Carl and Richard, the canisters, the water samples, Agnes's Idaho documents, and Maria's testimony. Each piece was a brick in the wall I was building around Helen. Grayson tried to dismiss the videos as manipulated, claiming I'd doctored them to frame his client. He painted me as a bitter loner, a mechanic with a grudge against Silver Pine's success. For a moment, I worried the jury might buy if his words were smooth, his delivery polished. But then Maria took the stand, her voice steady as she described Helen's campaign against her orchard. "She sent men to my property at night," Maria said, holding up a photo of her ruined trees. "They poured something into the soil. By spring, nothing would grow." The jury's faces shifted, doubt creeping in. Agnes followed, laying out Helen's Idaho history with surgical precision. She read from a deposition where a rancher described Helen laughing as his family was forced to sell their land for pennies. She said, "You'll thank me when this place is civilized," Agnes quoted, her voice cutting through the room. The judge's expression darkened, and I knew we had her attention. Helen took the stand last, her performance a masterclass in manipulation. She teared up, clutching a tissue, claiming she was the victim of a vindictive smear campaign. "I've only ever wanted to protect our community," she said, her voice breaking. "Mr. Thornton is using fabricated evidence to destroy everything we've built." But her act faltered under cross-examination. When the prosecutor played the video of Carl pouring chemicals into my creek, she stammered, claiming she'd had no knowledge of his actions. When Agnes's Idaho documents were introduced, she screamed, "Those were lies." Just like these lies, the judge's gavel slammed, silencing her outburst, but the damage was done. The jury saw her for what she was, a predator caught in her own trap. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Carl Dempsey, sweating through his cheap suit, took the stand as a last-minute witness. He'd flipped, terrified of being Helen's scapegoat. "She told me to do it," he said, his voice trembling. "Said the creek was key to the resort deal. Told me to poison it, make it unusable, so Thornton would sell cheap. She promised me a cut of the profits." He produced text messages, time-stamped and damning, showing Helen's instructions, "Make it quick. No witnesses." The courtroom erupted, and Helen's lawyer couldn't object fast enough. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said, her voice like steel. "The Silver Pines HOA is fined $150,000 for environmental damage, criminal conspiracy, and fraud. Helen Warrick is removed as president, effective immediately, and barred from any HOA leadership in Montana. Furthermore, I'm ordering a federal investigation into her activities, including potential charges for environmental crimes and witness tampering." Helen's scream echoed through the courthouse, a raw, desperate sound that made even her lawyer flinch. "This isn't over," she shouted as bailiffs restrained her. "You'll all pay for this." But her threats felt hollow, the ravings of a queen dethroned. I walked out into the sunlight, the crowd cheering as I held up the deed to my land, now protected as a conservation easement to prevent future disputes. Matt Coleman met me on the steps, his face a mix of relief and guilt. "You did good, Jake," he said, handing me a folder. "Thought you'd want this." Found it in Helen's office during a search. Inside was a newspaper clipping from Idaho, 10 years old, with a headline that hit like a gut punch: "Developer accused of fraud in land grab scheme." Helen's photo stared back, younger but with the same predatory smile. The article detailed how she and Richard Holt had forged documents to seize water rights, only to lose a massive lawsuit. One victim's quote stood out: "Helen laughed as she took our home. She cried when she paid for it. The settlement had cost her millions, forcing her to flee to Montana." I folded the clipping, tucking it into my pocket. She'd thought she could rewrite her story here, but I'd made sure it ended the same way. That evening, I stood by the creek, watching EPA crews clean the water. The chemical sheen was fading, and a pair of ducks had already returned, paddling lazily in the current. I held Clara's letter, reading her words again. "Fight for it, Jake." I'd kept my promise, but the victory felt bittersweet. The land was safe, but the scarce chemicals in the water, broken fences. Years of threats would take time to heal. I raised a beer to the sky, to Clara, and whispered, "This is still our home." But the peace didn't last. As I walked back to my truck, the alarm blared, shattering the quiet. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a note, the paper singed at the edges. The handwriting unmistakably Helen's. "You won the battle, Thornton, but the war's not over." The smell of gasoline lingered, a threat as clear as the words. My heart raced as I scanned the darkening trees, every shadow a potential enemy. Helen was down, but not out, and someone was still helping her. I texted Matt the photo of the note, my message simple: "She's not done. Watch your back." The next morning, I found more evidence of her desperation. My mailbox was smashed, and a scorched photo of my creek was pinned to the wreckage with a knife. The back read, "Sell or it burns." I laughed, a hard, bitter sound, and photographed the evidence. Helen was unraveling, her threats growing sloppier, more personal. I sent the images to Matt, who called within minutes. "We've got her on harassment now," he said. EPA's testing the canisters you found. If they match the chemicals in the creek, she's facing federal time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Helen had one last card to play. I drove to Agnes's, needing her perspective. She was in her garden, pruning roses, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She's cornered, Agnes said, wiping dirt from her hands. Cornered animals are dangerous. You need to end this before she does something you can't undo. She handed me a new file. This one with bank records showing payments from Helen to a private security firm in Billings. These guys aren't your average rent-a-cops, she said. Ex-military, expensive. She's hired muscle Jake. Whatever she's planning, it's big. That night, my cameras caught the final act. 5 men in black tactical gear descended on the creek, carrying cans of gasoline and crowbars. They smashed my dock, tore down my birdhouses, and poured fuel along the banks, laughing like they were untouchable. One pulled off his mask to light a cigarette, revealing a face I recognized from Victor Grayson's law firm, a hired thug, not some random vandal. I saved the footage, my hands steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Helen had gone all in, and she'd just handed me the key to her downfall. The final hearing was a spectacle. Reporters packed the courtroom, cameras flashing outside as the prosecutor played the new footage. The jury watched in silence as the men destroyed my property, the whole logo visible on one of their jackets. Financial records showed payments from Helen's personal account to the security firm. And Carl's testimony sealed the deal. She wanted the creek burned, he said, his voice shaking. Said it had forced Thornton to sell. Told us to make it look like an accident. Helen's lawyer tried to spin it, claiming she'd been coerced by Richard Holt. But the evidence was too much. The judge's voice was ice as she delivered the verdict. Helen Warrick, you are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for environmental crimes, conspiracy, and destruction of property. The Silver Pines HOA is dissolved pending a full audit of its finances. The gavel fell, and Helen's scream was drowned out by the crowd's cheers. Outside, the protesters erupted, signs waving as news vans broadcast the story live. HOA Queen Dethroned screamed the headlines, with photos of Helen in handcuffs. Her designer blazer wrinkled, her face a mask of fury. Matt met me on the courthouse steps, his expression lighter than I'd seen in months. You did it, Jake. She's done. Not yet, I said, thinking of the singed note. She's got friends out there. This isn't over. But I had one final move. At a community meeting the next week, I stood before the residents of Silver Pines, many of whom had supported Helen until the truth came out. I've got an announcement, I said, holding up a new deed. Last month, I bought 50 acres of Silver Pines land from a foreclosure sale your clubhouse. Your tennis courts, your precious view. According to your own bylaws, that makes me the majority landowner. The room went silent, faces pale with shock. I smiled, echoing Clara's words in my mind. I'm dissolving the HOA board and calling for new elections. No more threats, no more lies. This community belongs to all of us now. A woman in the back stood, her voice trembling but strong. Mr. Thornton, I'm from Elk Ridge, 2 towns over. Our HOA's pulling the same stunts Helen did. Will you help us? She handed me a folder, her eyes pleading. I thought of Clara, of her insistence that we use our land to do good. I'll look into it, I said, knowing I'd say yes. That night, I stood by the creek, now clean and alive again, the water reflecting a sky full of stars. Clara's letter was in my hand, her words a promise kept. This land's our home, Jake. I raised a beer to her, my heart full. The war was won, but as I turned to head inside, I saw a fresh set of tire tracks near the creek. A single matchstick left in the dirt. No note this time, just a warning. Helen was gone, but her shadow lingered, and someone was still out there, watching. I checked my cameras, my resolve hardening. Let them come. I'd beaten Helen at her own game, and I'd do it again. This was our home, Clara's and mine, and nobody was going to take it away.